Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Super excited for this video as we're going to give my trade deadline winners and losers. This will be the first of a series of videos following the NBA trade deadline. Of course, I was live all day long. We had over 5,000 live concurrent viewers, which was crazy. I'm sure a lot of you were a part of that. If you were, huge thank you again. I really do appreciate you guys. And let's jump into it here now with my trade deadline winners and losers. Pretty straightforward, pretty cut and dry, and let's jump into it with my first winner, the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, kind of a quieter trade deadline, but given their circumstances around Joel Embiid, you can understand exactly why. They made some interesting moves though, and some that I think are pretty quality moves on the margins. They acquired Buddy Hield via the Indiana Pacers. They also got Cam Payne, and they were able to acquire 2 second-round picks in the process. In the trade deadline, though, they also dealt Marcus Morris for King Korkmaz. They traded Daniil House Jr., which opened up some money for them to potentially go out in the buyout market. They traded Patrick Beverley and a few second-round picks. So they did come out a little bit pick negative when it comes to their assets, but I think that they did improve their roster even while selling off some pieces. I think Buddy Hield is a really good gravity shooter, one that significantly enhances their team around Joel Embiid, assuming he perhaps comes back healthy this season. If not, it gives you a shooter who still complements your team, maybe helps you stay competitive this season. And the thing I love about it here for Philadelphia specifically is that it didn't cost them any first round picks. They kept all of their flexibility going forward. Now, I know probably disappointing to some Sixers fans that they didn't go get Andre Drummond. They didn't go get a real backup big man to kind of fill the center void while Embiid is out. I totally understand that. But at the same time, I do think that they improved their roster. They kept all of their cap flexibility open for this offseason. They didn't make any big panic trade, which I think was genius on their part. I would have hated if they kind of committed a lot of their assets that they got from the James Harden trade into something that wasn't going to really enhance their odds this year. I think Buddy Hield, if Embiid comes back healthy, Hield is a nice addition. Definitely helps them, raises their championship odds a little tiny bit. Buddy Hield's not a great player, but he's a good player who has a really necessary skill that I think will enhance Philadelphia's two-man game around Maxey and Embiid. This also gives Nick Nurse something he's never really even had as a coach, which is a real gravity shooter. Never had one of those in Toronto, really. I think the closest thing to that was Norm Powell. And then if you look at what he's had in Philadelphia so far, there's just not a player like Buddy Hield. So you get a player who I think in a new situation will be refreshed. This is a down year for him shooting-wise, and he's still shooting 38% from 3. That's how good of a shooter he is. He gets shots at the rim, but most of them come from behind the three-point line, which is exactly what Philadelphia needed more of. They threw out players who didn't play for them. In Morris, Korkmaz, Beverley was going to lose his role. Getting Cam Payne here doesn't mean anything to me, really, but you did get some second-round picks back in trades, which I do think is important. In all, I think that the 76ers had a pretty good trade deadline given their circumstances. Then some losers, and well, I've got 3 of them that I want to touch on here, and it really all falls into one category, and that loser is teams that should have bought. For me, these 3 teams are probably teams that I think are going to find themselves a little bit in a weird situation in the playoffs because they're really talented. One of them might miss the playoffs. Heck, 2 of them might miss the playoffs. The Lakers and Warriors right now just have had tough seasons despite LeBron James's excellence, despite Anthony Davis's excellence, despite Steph Curry's excellence. For the Golden State Warriors, I think all 3 of these teams would have been poised to buy. The Pelicans a little bit less so. That's why their logo is a little bit smaller on the graphic. I'm not as focused on them here. They were linked to DeJounte Murray. I think the fact that they didn't overpay in any kind of trade is probably good for them. So I'm not as concerned about New Orleans, although I would have loved for them to improve at either the point guard or center spot. They did neither, which is partially why I wish that they would have made some kind of move that would have improved their roster a bit. The Lakers, for me, I think that they definitely needed an upgrade, specifically to their scheme. They needed someone who is going to stretch the floor. The price point that allowed the Sixers to get Buddy Hield is something that I think the Lakers should have tried to figure out a way to do. They did not get that done. They did not add any real form of shooting to this team. We still do have the buyout market as a possibility. We'll talk about Spencer Dinwiddie among other candidates in future videos. So I do think that there is still something in the works here, maybe for the Lakers to improve their roster. But again, it's not the same magnitude of an upgrade, I would say, that the Lakers really need to contend around LeBron James. And when you have a 39-year-old playing at an all-NBA caliber and you have another forward in Anthony Davis playing at an all-NBA caliber, you should be trying to win. And the Lakers just, quite frankly, didn't do that this deadline, so they're a loser to me. And then Golden State, you might miss the playoffs just flat out. You might even miss the play-in this year. They have not played well. Jonathan Kuminga, I know, has been a bright spot as of late, but they didn't do anything. They didn't move Wiggins. They didn't move Chris Paul. They didn't do anything with Draymond Green, which is okay. Klay Thompson, of course, is still there. I'm glad that they didn't do anything super crazy and completely screw their future, but at the same time, if you want to win with a 35-year-old Steph Curry, you don't have a whole bunch of years left. I get wanting to wait and be patient and make the right decisions, and maybe there wasn't anything on the table that moved the needle enough for Golden State. That's definitely a fair rebuttal to my point. But when it comes to what Golden State needed to get done, it was massive improvements. And they had contracts to go get stuff to work out. They didn't even free any space. They didn't help themselves financially. They didn't help their owners. The only thing that they did was trade Corey Joseph for a second-round pick, which I think was really, really good for them. Getting off of Corey Joseph was just a no-brainer. He's not good at all. I was not really sure why the Pacers did that, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, the Warriors, for me, still a loser here. I just don't think they accomplished anything that they needed to, and I'm sure a lot of Warriors fans share that same sentiment. If you are curious about other teams, by the way, as we go throughout this, comment down below. I will be responding to all of the comments today, so let me know. Winner number 2, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder in here. I really like their trade deadline for a few different reasons. First of all, getting Gordon Hayward, I think, was very sneaky. He's on an expiring contract, and I think one thing, when everyone was looking for Oklahoma City to make a big buy move, the name that often came up was Lauri Markkanen. Sometimes Mikal Bridges was linked to the team. And I understand some of those names, and I understand what people were hoping for. Of course, a lot of people were looking for big men too. Nick Claxton came up. You also heard people talking about Wendell Carter, Kelly Olynyk. The reality is, around those situations, there was going to be financial implications long-term with Oklahoma City, and there are already going to be concerns about keeping Shea, J-Dub, and Chet Holmgren long-term, given what their contracts and rookie max extensions will likely look like down the road. OKC chose a very conservative approach here, but one that still makes them better, getting Gordon Hayward. I think he fits perfectly into their system. I know people will point to his injury history as a concern. Totally fair, but I think in Oklahoma City, they're going to scale back his minutes. He's not going to play as big of a role as he has in the past in teams like Utah, Boston, and Charlotte. So because of that, I hope he can stay healthy for them. I think he gives them a good veteran that kind of raises their average age a little bit. Obviously, he spent a good amount of time in the NBA so far throughout his career. He's played in playoff series. He's played in really meaningful playoff games. And I think for a player who's been around the league, seen it a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different times, he can come right in. And I think he'll actually be elevated by the way that OKC plays with all of the spacing that they have on the floor. I think he's going to have maybe some of the best basketball of his career. I still think he can really play. I know people look at his contract and say overpaid. It doesn't mean he's not good, though. And I think that's a big difference. And they only gave up players who really didn't matter to them. Trey Mann was completely out of the rotation. Davis Bertans was a complete nothing. Vasi Micic was basically a $7.7 million walking trade exception. That's the way I've looked at him basically since the first week of the season, when you could just tell he probably wasn't going to be staying in OKC for much longer past either this trade deadline or next. He got dealt in this. And I also really like the draft pick move that they made. They traded their late first-round pick this year, one that wasn't going to be a very good pick, in the late 20s in a draft that a lot of people look at as a weaker draft class. I myself don't necessarily believe that. I think there's a lot of talent in this draft still, but there's not really the true, like, hey, this is a for sure round one guy that we feel safe about at that point. So because of that, they get off of that pick. They send that over to Washington in a 3-team trade. And in a sneaky maneuver, they end up taking the Mavericks 2028 first-round pick swap. We're going to talk about Dallas later in this video. But I think that's just a really clever move by Sam Presti. He's stocking up all of these swap options. He's stocking up future picks. And I think that was a really smart move. One that I think could really benefit Oklahoma City down the road. And who knows, maybe in 2028, we're looking at them having a top 10 pick. And we're going to be wondering how, and it's from a really sneaky 2024 NBA trade deadline. Again, Sam Presti just nails it like he always does. Moving into our second loser, Killian Hayes. No, it's not the Detroit Pistons. It is just Killian Hayes, and I think there's a very obvious reason why. Nobody wanted him. There was no interest in Killian Hayes around the league. It didn't seem like the Pistons could even get a second-round pick for him. So for a player who less than a week ago requested a trade, his camp comes out and says, oh, I don't want to be with the Pistons. I want a better opportunity. Well, where's that opportunity coming from? I joked the moment that news came out that it would be Cholet, which is an L&B Pro A team back in France. And it very well might be that for him. I was obviously joking, but at the end of the day, I feel so vindicated in the way that Killian Hayes' career has panned out. Some notable draft analysts viewed him as the number one player in the 2020 draft, and I just could never believe that. I was never a fan of Killian Hayes, really low on his game. Never was good. Wasn't even that good in France, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. If you go look at his shooting splits again, you're going to say, whoa, why did people think this guy was going to be good? I don't know. And I think the fact that he got cut today is an indication that there's not interest around the league in adding Killian Hayes. You know, the Pistons have given him every single opportunity. He never maximized it in any sense of the word. Couldn't stay healthy early in his career. Never really developed. I think that's partially on the Pistons, but also just kind of an indication on where his starting level was coming into the league. He was not a good enough NBA player to really thrive or succeed in the NBA. And I think this trade deadline gives us a good example of that. And it feels, again, very vindicating for me and all my analysis around him, as Pistons fans time and time again told me that I'm low on him and I'm a sleeper and that, you know, I'm just a hater. I mean, I guess all 30 NBA teams are haters now too. Moving on to winner number 3, you can tell I'm not just a Pistons hater because I actually have the Pistons as a winner here. I think that they had a pretty good trade deadline for themselves. They acquired Simone Fontecchio, who is a quality 3-and-D type of wing from Utah. He's 28 years old. I know not as exciting as a lot of people would like, but still quality. They got Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr. Really the big thing here is the trade with the Knicks, though. They got Quentin Grimes, Malachi Flynn, and they landed multiple second-round picks throughout the trade deadline this week. They were able to get one from Minnesota from Monte Morris. They were able to get a couple from New York. They just made a bunch of nice moves. They did trade away a second-round pick that they had. I'm okay with that given how young their roster is. I think those second-rounders are good trade bait, using them in other deals. And then also they trade away Kevin Knox, Monte Morris, Alec Burks, and Bojan Bogdanovic. And I know a lot of people might look at this and say, wait, their acquired players aren't necessarily that much better than their traded players. Why do you think they're a big winner here? It's a team that was pretty old. Their veterans weren't really that great of contributors around their young guys that they do currently have. I think this better reshapes their roster after now releasing Killian Hayes, moving off some of their pieces. They waived Joe Harris. I think they've got a better franchise direction now at this point. The Pistons didn't have as much to work with as teams like the Warriors and Lakers and a bunch of other teams. Even the Phoenix Suns, you could argue, had more to work with in some ways. And yet the Pistons were able to accomplish a lot. And I'm very happy about that for them. They were able to move Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks both to New York. I do like that for the Knicks as well, by the way. I think the Knicks did a pretty good job themselves this trade deadline. But I think for the Pistons, just looking at it, Monte Morris was an expiring contract. What were you going to do? Keep him for another 30 games? Getting a second-round pick all the way out in 2030 still made sense to me. I still like that move for them. Getting Quentin Grimes, I think, a really sneaky pickup here. New York obviously just ran out of time with him. Felt like they need to push for contention right now because they're in that inner circle. And I understand that for the Knicks, but I think the Pistons do pretty well getting a player who, if he really hits and he starts making some of his open jump shots, can become a really nice contributor for the Pistons alongside Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, among others. I think the Pistons are in a very strong spot and obviously in a really good position all in all. And yes, they traded some good veterans. They traded some other pieces, but I think that they did a good job for themselves this trade deadline. Now for my Dallas Mavericks, and they are a pretty firm loser to me. Now there's a couple of things I have to say. People are going to not hear this part because they don't listen very well. Hear me out. They got better today. Their team is much better today than it was yesterday. They acquired PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. I specifically really love the Daniel Gafford fit. This, for the first time since 2011-2012, roughly in that time area, gives the Mavericks a good center rotation for 48 minutes. I think that Lively and Gafford are the two types of bigs you would want next to Luka Doncic. Both of them good screen and roll guys. Both of them big, high-volume rim protectors. Daniel Gafford swats shots like he means it. Okay, he's a really good addition. He's very athletic. I think he's going to really excel playing off of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. They did a great job there, in my opinion, finding a guy who fit their team and landing him. They also were able to get PJ Washington, who in a vacuum is a good quality player, and yes, he's a better player than Grant Williams. The issue, though, is what they gave up, and it's not necessarily that it's not fair value, it's the opportunity cost to do it. They did get a couple second-round picks too. That is important. I didn't want to fly over that. That is important to mention. But they gave up a ton in this package here. They gave up their own 2027 first-round pick, only top 2 protected. I would have loved, if they are going to trade that pick, I would have loved for it to be top 10 protected with some conditions into 2028 that would pretty much heavily protect the pick, at least a little bit more than top 2. the fact that it's top 2 protected basically means it's very limited in its protection. And there's a world that with the Mavericks and everything going on around them, that they're sending the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever pick to Charlotte at that point in time. I think the Hornets did really well for themselves this trade deadline. And then my big concern here is they also traded that 2028 first round pick swap. We already mentioned it. They traded that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder as a way of landing Daniel Gafford. The Thunder, of course, helped them out, sent a 2024 pick to Washington. I thought Washington had a pretty good trade deadline for themselves, although I'm surprised they did not trade Tyus Jones, which is not why they're not in my winners category here. And then the Hornets also got Grant Williams and Seth Curry. It's going to be fun to see Seth Curry in Charlotte. Obviously, his father, Del Curry, is on the broadcast team there, so that's a cool little storyline. But Grant Williams, I mean, he's been this season what he's been for his career, which is a quality role player. The issue is Dallas is looking for a number 3 player on their roster. If you ask me right now who's the 3rd best player on the team, you're probably going to get the answer of, hey, it's a 19-year-old rookie center, Derek Lively. That's a problem. And Dallas continues to have this problem because their asset management is very poor. They now have 0 tradable first-round picks until draft night. Once they get to draft night, they'll either be able to trade their 2024 first. If it doesn't convey, which I'm expecting it will, but you never know. At this time last year, they were in this similar position, ended up tanking down the stretch of the season. So you never really know. But right now, they don't have a lot of trade flexibility. They're at a spot where they're kind of stuck. They owe pretty much every other year's first round pick out the door. They now owe swaps in 2028 and 2030. They're just not in a great spot, and they're not going to have a lot of pathways and potential avenues to continue improving the team. Now, if they do convey the pick this year, they have 2025 and 2031 as tradable first, but we've seen in the past teams like the Lakers have even struggled to use far out future first when they traded their 2027 first last year. They struggled to get real suitors for that. So if you're Dallas, what does a 2031 first mean? And how are you going to be able to utilize that to improve your roster around Luka Doncic? I think the Mavericks are in a constant struggle right now where they're trying to quickly improve their team without any care for their assets on hand. They did it with Porzingis. Then they traded Dinwiddie and Finney-Smith away for Kyrie. They've made a bunch of crazy moves where they just continually every single year sell more and more and more. And then you are in a rabbit hole where you just never stop selling. And they're going to run out of assets at some point. The team is going to look bleak and bad. And we've seen it this year. When they're injured, they're not good. And it's because they don't have a 3rd best player. They don't have a 4th best player. And it's hard to get those guys when you're continually poor with your assets. I think Washington's a good player. I think Gafford's a good player. The team is significantly better today than it was yesterday. But at what cost? And that's really the reason why I think Dallas is a big-time loser. If I didn't mention a team that you want to know about, whether that's your favorite team or just another team around the league, make sure to comment down below and ask me what I think about them. I will be responding again to all of those comments. Really do appreciate everyone. Once again, you guys went crazy during the trade deadline live stream, so thanks everyone for watching, whether that was all day in the live stream or just this video. I really do appreciate you all. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.